Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and I have literally just finished watching the 13th movie of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I have just watched Captain America Civil War. What are my thoughts? This movie was incredible. More and more as I go through these films, I'm getting to the point now, especially I think in phase 3, where it's going to be harder to look at each movie on its individual merits or as an individual structure, rather than part of a larger, cohesive whole. And so I'm going to try to shift my approach in that way. So, this movie, amazing, probably the best one I've seen so far. It's funny looking back in retrospect and realising that actually it was a Captain America trilogy which I had the least hope for, and which actually I've ended up enjoying the most. So how does the movie start? It starts off with the attack in Lagos, where Scarlet Witch makes a mistake and ends up killing some innocent bystanders. I totally forgot that happened, but of course it makes sense because that's one of the threads that they got out of the Civil War comic written by Mark Millar, and that's what kind of brought in, inspired this movie, I suppose. Scarlet Witch, of course, at this stage no longer has an accent, thank God, because the accent was terrible. Although they do bring in Martin Freeman, who's a British actor who I've seen in the BBC, and his American accent is unfortunately not good. You then move into the scene at MIT where Stark gets approached by someone who is the mother of one of the victims in Sokovia. And I forget that scene. It does work well. It was a decent scene. I can see the why I kind of forgot it earlier on, first time I watched it, because it's a relatively underplayed scene. However, now looking back on it, I do wonder how contrived it kind of comes off. I mean, there is this element and this thematic cliche in comics of having someone guilted into doing the right thing by some kind of relatively arbitrary thing. I mean, you get this a lot in Punisher comics. You get this a lot sort of across the comics industry, and I know it's called fridging or grudging or things like that, where you have someone vulnerable die specifically for the mechanism of motivating the main character. And it's used here, I think, for one of the first times I've seen it used in the MCU, and it works okay. I would be interested to see a little bit more about the interaction between Stark and that woman and what goes on, but I don't think that comes up in the later movies. That then moves us smoothly into the politics of this movie, and I have to say I do love the politics of this movie. There's two major sort of debates about the role of superheroes, the regulatory oversight that applies to them, whether or not might makes right, what kind of structures and disciplines need to be put in place to control them. The first one is a scene with General Ross, and the second one is a scene between Tony Stark and Captain America. And each one is really interesting, really nuanced. Personally, I love that sort of political debate when it comes to superheroes, when it comes to understanding what they do and why they do it. And so frankly, for me, those were some of the strongest elements of this movie. I absolutely loved it. A lot of the dialogue, a lot of the debates, and a lot of the discussion of this movie were fantastic. The eulogy at Peggy Carter's funeral, which Sharon Carter gives, is an excellent bit of dialogue that I can't believe I overlooked first time round. And similarly, when Spider-Man is talking and Peter Parker's explaining that he does the things that he does because to have the powers and not to use them means that bad things happen because of you. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it's just really well put together, both in the sense that it avoids that great power, great responsibility cliche, whilst also evoking the exact same themes and message. I thought that was really, really interesting. Overall, the film is really, really well put together. Obviously, of course, you then have the obligatory action scenes. You've got the fight in Bucharest, which reveals Black Panther, which, to be honest, I totally forgot got introduced in this particular movie. You then have the breakout scene from S.H.I.E.L.D., and you then have the battle at the German airbase. In terms of the airport battle, I just want to stop here and just have a little bit of a moment to talk about Spider-Man. This movie introduces Spider-Man, does a brilliant job doing that. Peter Parker's never been in any of the MCU movies before, and they managed to introduce him and get him up and running in a major fight within a movie, and it doesn't seem jarring. It's awesome the way that they introduce him without going back over his backstory, which we've seen relaunched about 3 times in the last 10-15 years. We don't need to know his backstory, it's not that important. We don't need to know about Uncle Ben, it's not that important. So launching into the way they've done it here is fantastic, and I was incredibly excited to see Spider-Man in this. And I think one of the reasons I was so excited to see Spider-Man portrayed as the way they portray him here is because of this one moment where he fights the Winter Soldier and Bucky goes to punch him, and he just grabs his hand really casually, and he's just looking at it, and he's like, "Ah, dude, you've got a metal arm. That's so cool." And it's completely missing Peter Parker. He completely misses the point that what he's doing is incredibly difficult. Like, this is the Winter Soldier, the guy with the cybernetic arm that can punch through armored doors, and for Peter, like, it's absolutely nothing. And I really like the way they kind of showed his incredible level of strength, of skill, of power. And when he's facing off against Captain America, various other people, I mean, he's facing off against the world's greatest soldier, and he's completely holding his own, and he's like bantering away and chatting and just sort of really nervous about the whole thing. It was a really kind of perfect depiction both of his naivety and also his strength. I think from my point of view, I never used to be a massive Spider-Man fan until Ultimate Spider-Man. And when I got into Ultimate Spider-Man, I absolutely loved it. And the arc that this kind of evoked or reminded me of was the Ultimate 6 arc in Ultimate Spider-Man, which I highly recommend you guys check out. I'm going to do a few spoilers of it here, so please skip ahead if you don't want to hear them. At one point in the Ultimate Spider-Man arc, Samuel Jackson, as in Nick Fury, brings Peter Parker to the Triskelion, to S.H.I.E.L.D., and he's like, oh, here's Spider-Man. And no one takes him seriously. Even Tony Stark is like, did you go back in time to get him? Like, how young is this kid? To which Nick Fury is like, look, he took down all these villains. These 6 villains we were trying to fight, he took them all down himself without anyone's help, so give him some respect. Later on, towards the end of the arc, of the Ultimate 6 arc, Aunt May's been kidnapped, or rather Peter thinks she's been kidnapped, and so he's been told to kill Captain America. And there's an amazing fight scene where he holds his own against Captain America. Not even that, he's actually just basically beating Captain America and really sort of pushing it back, and it's like, I have to do this. I have to do this or he's going to kill my aunt. And it's only when Captain America is like, no, we have your aunt. It's okay, you don't have to do this. That you then see Peter turn around, approach the Green Goblin, who in the Ultimate Universe is a huge Hulk-esque being, and just knock him on his ass. And it's amazing because it kind of highlights a whole series of things to me, just in that one story arc alone. Just how much he's underestimated, how powerful he is, how strong he is, how able he is, just in terms of having this kind of spider sense enhanced fighting style. And all that sort of stuff really, for me, kind of solidified what my interpretation of Spider-Man was. And so watching this movie and watching Tom Holland as Peter Parker doing exactly those sorts of things, fighting Captain America to a standstill, grabbing hold of Winter Soldier's arm and just not even realising that that's a difficult thing to do, all that sort of stuff, just phenomenal. Like, it really set up for what I was hoping to be an amazing Spider-Man movie as the next movie. Anyway, enough talk about Spider-Man. Then you had the final battle in Siberia, you have Zemo, you have a pretty solid ending. Overall, great movie. The longest movie of the MCU so far, clocking at 142 minutes, is longer than any of the Avengers movies. And I can see why a lot of people thought this was kind of like an Avengers 2.5 or Iron Man 4, because really it kind of transcends being labelled as a Captain America movie. This is the first bona fide MCU movie that we have, and I think it's the last one that we have until Infinity War, which brings everyone together again. So absolutely excellent, stellar film on every level. I don't really know, I can't really give it a score in and of itself, because this movie does not exist and does not work until you've watched all the others. If you watch this and you hadn't watched any of the others, I honestly don't know what you think of it. I don't know if you'd even like it. I'd give just one last final thought to DC. So Batman vs Superman came out round about the same time as Civil War, and you can imagine an exec in DC in the offices speaking to the production team, just going, okay, well, what happened with Batman vs Superman got panned. Why did it get panned? Oh, it got panned really sort of for 4 main reasons. Apparently it's because it introduces a brand new supervillain in the same film that hasn't got any superpowers, and you don't get much time to let him breathe. And obviously it centres quite a lot on a billionaire playboy in a power suit whose final resolution, a final battle, is just to do with his own issues with his mother. And of course, finally, it just introduces multiple new characters. It introduces at least 2 new characters to set up new franchises, and it's just too busy, and the film is just too long, and it's just, those were all the criticisms we had. We should have done it a bit like Civil War. Oh, really? What's Civil War about? What's everyone like about that? Oh, well, it introduces a new supervillain without any superpowers. It's got a billionaire playboy in a power suit that ends up having issues to do with their mother. And it introduces multiple new characters that set up their own spin-off movies. Yeah, I just feel really sorry for DC, because looking at Civil War and then looking back at Batman vs Superman, they must have felt so confused and so unsure as to what the movie-going public wanted. I don't know. I'm probably not the first person to point out how similar these two movies are in some ways, but whereas Batman vs Superman was terrible, Civil War was amazing. And those are my thoughts. Please like, comment, subscribe. Please let me know what you think of the series. Please let me know how you're getting on with the quarantine and if you're watching along the movies with me. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon and picking up the first episode of my pro superhero novel, No Gods or Kings. It's about a whole new superhero universe where superpowers are real and the world has changed dramatically as a result. And as always, guys, until tomorrow when I'll be watching Spider-Man Homecoming, stay classy.